Hello, everyone. In this afternoon session, it's a great pleasure for me to, and I'm very grateful for being asked to lead this discussion on catastrophes, mostly. Leading this roundtable. The title of the roundtable is Between Trauma, Memory and Forgetting: Nuclear, Environmental and Human-Induced Disasters in the 20th and 21st Century. We have three wonderful, brilliant academics who agreed to join us. The first is Kamila Biskupska from the Wrocław University, sociologist, a wonderful scholar working, among others, on the heritage, dissonant heritage of a German past, I'd say, in Wrocław, but also regarding the topic we are working on. She works on the flood of Wrocław in 1997. The other presenter is Marco Armiero, our former ESCH president, so Environmental Society for European Society for Environmental History president. But Marco Armiero is also an Catalan Institute for Research and Advanced Studies professor. This is an institution which is equivalent to a distinguished professors at the Institute for the History of Science, Autonomous University of Barcelona. He served as a president, as I already mentioned, from 2019 to 2023. From 2013 to 2022, he held the position of director of the Environmental Humanities Laboratory in Stockholm, significantly contributing to its global prominence in the emerging field. His research focused on topics such as the nationalization of nature, migrations and their environmental impact, and environmental justice. Through his work, he has played a pivotal role in bridging the fields of environmental humanities and political ecology. And last but not least, of course, Boris Nordenbons, who is Associate Professor of Literary and Cultural Analysis at the University of Amsterdam. He's the principal investigator in the ERC-funded research project Conspiratorial Memory, Cultures of Suspicion in Post-Socialist Europe, 2021-2026. His research centers largely on the former socialist bloc and on Russia in particular, and concerns issues of nostalgia, post-Soviet cultural memory, cultural colonialism, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. Now I would like to ask all the presenters to speak a bit more about the specific catastrophes, disasters, natural cultural disasters you were and are working on. Let's start from Kamila Biskupska.
Hello, it's working, yeah. Hello, nice to see you. And I'm stressed, so I'm speaking very vaguely. My topic for today is flood, as Małgosia said, from 1997. And it's a part of my thinking about so-called regained territories, and Wrocław especially. So about the terrains which were annexed to Poland after the Second World War, and the problems, identity problems, that the people living on the terrain struggle with still. And the flood from 1997 is part of my, I think, analyzing studies. And I think that I would talk today a lot about the Oder, our river, because it's very connected to the topic of the specific flood. Should I say something about the flood, historical background? Okay, so the flood happened in July 1997, not only in Poland, but in Germany, Austria, Slovakia. It was quite huge flood. It was caused by high rainfalls And it's forgotten today, I think, that was the problem. And I analyze, in my work, I analyze this very small fragment of this social and cultural perspective of this flood. And in the case, especially of Wrocław, and how, I would say how it's remembered, but I think that's more precisely to say how it's forgotten, how it's in the area of oblivion, and we don't know, we don't want to remember it. And I think, more discuss this problem today in some context, political or cultural.
Okay, thank you very much for this very introductional remarks. We are going to go much deeper into the details of your work in a minute. Now I would like to ask Marco to speak a bit about your catastrophe you are working on. So what is the questions of Vaillant Dam catastrophe? What is your new project? We can't hear you, sorry.
No?
Oh, yes, right now,
Okay,
perfectly.
now. Okay, very good. Well, so first of all, I want really to thank all of you, the organizers, for inviting me to this conference. And also, of course, I owe a special thank you because you are allowing me to speak on distance. I'm talking to you from my university in Barcelona, where we are having a huge conference on the history of the city, where I was invited to give a lecture. So thank you very much for allowing me to be there, you know, through this channel. Okay, I am an environmental historian and a political ecologist, and this is more or less almost the title of my just published book, The Tragedy of the Vaillant, A Political Ecology of an Unnatural Disaster. I don't know how much people outside Italy know about this disaster. This year, 2023, was the 60th anniversary of this disaster. It happened then in 1963, on the 9th of October of 1963, a gigantic landslide felt from a mount up in the Alps, Montauk. And it was a gigantic slide, more or less 300 million of cubic meters. So, you know, you can say almost half of the mountain fell into the reservoir, this hydroelectric reservoir. And what happened was that the landslide generated a gigantic wave, more or less 50 million cubic meter of water. The water overcame the dam. The dam is still there. Even in Italy, many people talk of the Vaillant Dam disaster, saying, oh yes, the terrible accident when the dam collapsed. But this is wrong. The dam didn't collapse. What collapsed was the mountain, actually. So the dam is still there. The water overcame the dam, and running into this canyon, the Vaillant Canyon, at 100 kilometers per hour, destroyed everything in front of it, and especially the town of Longarone. 2,000 people were killed. And I think that, I mean, my book is not so different from what our colleague was saying a minute ago, because the Vaillant is also a story that has been more or less forgotten, almost erased by the collective memory of the country. I am an historian, right? I studied in a kind of humanities high school. Then I graduated in history, more specifically in contemporary history. I have a PhD in economic history. Well, all this about my biography, only to say that I have never read anything about the Vaillant in all my academic life. The merit to make the Vaillant disaster visible is not a merit of historians, but is a merit of an actor. Marco Pollini is a student of Dario Fo, the Nobel Prize winner, and he did a fantastic job with the theatrical piece to remember, to re-put on how can I say, on the map, on the memory map of the nation, the story of the Vajont. I would stop here, if it's okay for you.
Yes, of course. You addressed many interesting problems that we are going to analyze a bit closer in my next questions. But before that, so thank you for this introduction to our next issues we are going to talk about. But before, I would like to ask Boris to develop a bit more about your catastrophe. And of course, we had a lot of discussions on Chernobyl, so we don't have to clear this up. But what is your scope?
So perhaps what I can do is to give a bit of a contextualization how I sort of came to this Chernobyl catastrophe and what I'm interested in when researching the way in which people basically make meaning of that catastrophe. So my project starts from sort of an irritation with the emerging, booming research in conspiracy theories, which is something that has recently really become sort of a field in itself, conspiracy theory research. Oh, push mic. Push.
It doesn't work?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is better. Sorry. Yeah. So the irritation is that a lot of the work on conspiracy theories often treats them as if they exist in sort of a historical vacuum. Right? As if they come out of the blue, there is a crisis, and people start to believe weird things, and there are specific people that are prone to believe even weirder things, and we can map how big the percentage of the population is that is committed to a specific theory. What I am interested in, by contrast, is to look at conspiracy theories as a form of memory, as being engaged in producing memory work, right? So conspiracy narratives, they tap into existing older mnemonic narratives in many cases. They revive modes of explanation, paradigms of explanation that are around. So the other way around, no, let's stick to this because I need to get to Chernobyl. What I do in my project is focusing on 3 cases where I try to basically untangle or understand this interplay between memory culture and conspiracy culture. One of them is, and that doesn't probably need a lot of explanation here in Poland, the 2010 Smolensk catastrophe. Where you see, of course, that memory discourses and conspiracy discourses are very clearly entangled and entwined. Another originally was planned as on the war in Donbass, where we saw at that point when I wrote it, before this war exploded, to the point where we are now, where we saw this interplay between stories about Bandera and Nazism and even American agents and imperialism infiltrating on the former Soviet Union, very much retro narratives that were combined with suspicion and conspiracy thinking. And the final sub-project, the final focal point, each of them involves multiple countries, as you notice, which is important, is the catastrophe, the nuclear catastrophe at Chernobyl in 1986. We have heard a lot about it. And I'm interested in the way that people explain and deal with something that is very ephemeral and elusive, like radiation. What kind of stories can you tell about something that doesn't offer itself up to any of the human senses, right? You don't smell it, you don't see it, you don't feel it until the moment that it is too late. So what kind of cultural forms, and I'm interested in cultural narratives, as expressed in different cultural media, but what kind of cultural modes of meaning-making exist around an event that seems to evade any attempt at meaning-making, right? What kind of story is there to tell about radiation?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think that the question of storytelling is very important when we address catastrophes in general. But first, maybe I'd like to continue this reflection that Marco brought in, which would be the question of the reactions to the catastrophes, because and also, of course, Camila, while speaking about the forgotten catastrophe, and I was wondering if you could maybe reflect a bit more about on what it depends. I mean, there's so many issues such as cultural backgrounds, political systems, different, of course, in almost each of catastrophes somehow. social and economic statuses, and the access to knowledge, which is also different, both in Italy, in Poland, and much more, of course, in Ukrainian case, in the Soviet Union case. Could you please describe a bit more the catastrophe you are working on with regard to this dimensions? Or maybe you would like to point out some different important dimensions that influence the reactions and the experience of going through a catastrophe. Marco, could you please develop a bit more on it?
Sure, I can try. I can try. Well, maybe something that I would like to know or to do is to develop, to explore your question in two different directions, a little bit in a more or less chronological sense, I would say. So before and after the catastrophe, the disaster. The Vajont Dam disaster, this 1963 dam disaster in Italy, I think is so relevant, and is so relevant, I forgot to tell you this before, that in 2008, right, the UNESCO, the UN Organization for Culture, Heritage, and so on and so forth, they decided to include the Vajont case in the list of the 5 precautionary tales for a sustainable future. So it's a, it's a global story. And why it's so important? Basically because it's a disaster that everyone knew was going to happen. And so I am now looking at the before the disaster happening, right? What happened before the disaster was that the villagers, they were extremely anxious, very scared about the construction of this gigantic dam in their territory. And they tried to mobilize, to do something to avoid the disaster. The point is, as you said, they didn't have the right knowledge to make their case, to make their point. In my story, it is very clear a clash, a conflict between the vernacular knowledge of the villagers, of the local people, and how can I say, the official, the scientific knowledge of the corporation, of the state authorities, and so on and so forth. Just to give you a couple of examples, I hope I am not taking too much time. Monte Toc. Monte Toc is the Italian name of this mountain. Well, in the local dialect, Toc meant something like the rotten mountain, or at least the mountain falling apart piece by piece, something like that. So you can imagine, no? When I say a clash between the different kind of knowledge, or for instance, many times the villagers were going to the corporation, to the office of the corporation, saying that their animals were very nervous for the noise coming from the mountains, from the dam. And of course, the people working there, they were making fun of these villagers, believing in noise, listening to the voice, if I can use this word, of animals. Just briefly, after the disaster, it was not so different. After the disaster, basically, again, the victims, the survivors, they didn't have the resources to defend their, how can I say, their interests. It was a very material thing. Just to give you an idea, the trial for the Vajont Dam disaster is a very big trial, and amazing archival resources for historians. And what is clear there is that while the corporation had something like 20 lawyers, the local villagers had 2. And no one from the Italian universities wanted to serve on behalf of the public prosecutor. No, only one person. His name was Floriano Calvino. He was a geologist. And if somebody in the public is how can I say, has some kind of passion for Italian literature and is thinking, well, Calvino, yes, he was the brother of Italo Calvino. And guess what? He lost his position as an adjunct professor because he was working with the public prosecutor. So I would say that maybe I can stop here, but before and after, the point was, especially for me, my approach is a more a political ecologist kind of approach, was an issue of power. the local villagers, the local communities didn't have the, how can I say, the currency, the right knowledge to oppose to the construction of the dam before and to try to get justice after.
This is very interesting because this also addresses our former discussions we had on the somehow exotization or orientalization of people who do not have the access to knowledge, not only in the colonial, I mean global scopes, but also in a very local scopes. You can see it easily, yeah? Like, for example, how peasants can be exoticized, or local people. So here you have also a kind of, I would say, tension of power in this dimension. But I think that what is very interesting about what you have just raised is that lack of the agency, lack of the bottom-up influence, I'd say, that is visible here, which is quite close to the sentiment we have also in a Soviet. I mean, of course, this is a different story, but I mean, this is also a kind of, I would say, the problem of democracies that are really facing a kind of non-democratic obstacles, while not being able to bring up the voice of locals, of people who are in the bottom or somewhere far from the power agents. So I think that this is a very important thing that also is somehow visible in a non-democratic, of course, states. So somehow addresses the question of Chernobyl. But maybe Kamila, could you please, because what just Marco said reveals also this I'd say this sense of being faced with a catastrophe that may come. And I think that this kind of sentiment was also quite present in a Polish context. People were or were not aware that the catastrophe might have come.
It's. I should do something.
But I just have to click the middle one. Sorry.
Now, yes. What a suspense. I forgot the question, sorry. Yes, I know, now I know. So the situation was quite opposite, we can say, that I don't know if people were aware, because when I think about it, Wrocław was, it's in the middle of the river of the Oder, so we know that there was this flood wave, and the river was flooding. But in Wrocław, people were surprised that it flooded, that it was impossible. And I think that what Marco said is also important for me, that there is a very important factor of before. Mm-hmm. So it starts in 1945, in this case, really, yeah, when Polish people came to the trains and they decided to ignore the river. They maybe not decide, but they simply refused to see the river. So there is a very big difference between the image of Oder made by Germans and by Polish people. And I would like to share with you my own memory from my childhood, because I think that it suits here very much. So when I was about 6, maybe 7, I saw the Oder first time, because I wasn't from Wrocław then. And I was amazed, because it was so huge, beautiful, very big river, and I was really amazed. And I thought there was nothing prettier in the world. And afterwards, I was a child, sorry. And afterwards, I hear in school from my parents, as you know, Oder is nothing special. And I asked, why? They say, it's not Polish river. It's strange. But it started in Czech Republic, then it's in Poland, then it's in Germany, then it's in Poland again. It's nothing special. Vistula is our river, because it's all Polish, and I should love only Vistula. So so I know this, had this feeling from my childhood that there was something wrong. And now when I was preparing, sensory speaking, for our meeting today, I read a lot about how people treat order in the past. And they simply ignore it. And it's not only a problem of Wrocław, but it's very visible in Wrocław that the city is standing back to the river. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the problem of regained territories, because we still feel that and I read it somewhere that the river is mumbling, but nobody knows in what language. And for Germans, it was beloved river, it was mother river. So I was really surprised when I read it, that it's impossible to feel this attachment to this exact river. So I think that was the beginning, that we didn't believe in Wrocław, in other cities, Polish cities, that it could happen, that this flood could happen, because we're not afraid of order, because we ignore it simply.
Okay, so there was no this sense of anxiousness that Marco was speaking
about. That, people, I think that is still the problem, because we have this very dramatic situation last year, in the summer 2022, this ecological catastrophe, that almost the order died then. And it's silence now. Nobody asks about order nowadays. So, as I observe it. So I think that is still the problem. But maybe you are, after our speaking, you should say that it's the problem of all rivers in Poland, that we don't care, simply. So it's not only problem with order, but, in Wrocław case, when I started to live in Wrocław, I was really surprised, because it's a very important part of the city, and it's really ignored. It's very hard to talk about the river. Because I didn't say that part of my reflections today is based on my interviews I did. And I asked people about the flood, and I asked people about the river, and they were surprised, because nobody talks about the river then. It was a few years ago. Maybe now it's a changing, but
yeah, because right now it's becoming more and more a kind of cultural phenomena, also because of a film, because of some other narrations. But it exists. This is also.
I really regret that I didn't, because I did my interviews before the film, the film about flood in Wrocław. So Wrocław now is famous because of Netflix, and. And I didn't, and everybody asked me if I saw the film, and even here, people ask me if I saw the film.
Because this is a very good production.
Yeah, and I remember you last year you told me that it's great, and I can't say it. I couldn't, and I can't say it, and I never will. Okay. If I may say that.
Thank you.
But I am really anxious if people in Wrocław watch the film and what they think about it, because I would like. That was the question about reaction of not yet. Okay, we will ask about how people remember the flood. So
let's stop here for now. Okay. We're gonna come back to these questions, of course, on reactions and about the memory of the catastrophe. Of course, this is the main issue here. But I would like to somehow link those those reflections Marco and Kamila had, and I'd like to ask you, Boris, if you see this this sense of fear or sense of anxiousness of before the catastrophe times, is it reflected somehow also in the conspiracy theories? Because if you have conspiracy theory, you have to have it built somehow on something, yeah? Of course, relating to the times from before the catastrophe, I suppose. So, would you say that there was a kind of sense of anxiousness there, or not really?
Yeah, first of all, so can I start there and then see if I can find also an interesting intersection between what Marco was saying and what Camila was saying. First of all, I think what we have also seen in the other presentations, there is a sense of unprecedentedness with Chernobyl, which made it very hard for people who were even in the middle of that event to understand the risks they were exposing themselves to. So that may be different, especially from Marco's case, right, where there is a history that is even reflected in the name of that mountain itself, that contains a premonition, if you will, of what was going to happen. What I found interesting and is something to which I think what I see relates to is that Camilla points to the necessity of having some kind of situated knowledge in relation to the environment, and the environmental potential threats that it offers. Right? You need some kind of lived attunement. Let's say attunement with that environment in order to be aware of the risks that it potentially gives. In the case of Marco, it's with the animals that behave in a particular way that sort of provide maybe the sensitivity of people to that danger. But also, what I understand from Marco's case is that it requires always some kind of mediation. In order to be aware of the dangers that the environment poses, we rely on forms of scientific mediation. We need a geologist, we need to have people that have that knowledge, and with that mediation also comes the politicization, I think, right, of knowledge about the environment. And that is something that in the Chernobyl case is very acute, because the visibility, the perceptibility of radiation itself is by definition something that is mediated. And that mediation is something that is highly political in itself. I want to refer you to the wonderful work of Olga Guchinskaya, who is a Belarusian author from originally. Her book, The Politics of Visibility, where she traces the history of the visibility of radiation in Belarus, arguably the most affected in terms of territory area, right, as a result of the Chernobyl catastrophe. And what she does is that she shows that the making visible of radiation has always been in Belarus a political decision, right? Do you provide people with maps of the areas? Do you not provide them with maps? What are the thresholds that you apply for the, places where you can and where you cannot live? Do you even measure? Do you continue to measure? Do you keep track of food that is contaminated? Even do you give people some kind of financial compensation? If you stop doing that, some people take that as a message that it is safe, right? But all of that are political decisions that are involved in mediating the dangers that the environment offers. And I think that the Chernobyl case sort of amplifies that, because there is hardly any unmediated knowledge of the threats that this environmental catastrophe offers.
So you'd say that there is more of sense of trust, because this is quite surprising, as generally the Soviet Union and people in the Soviet Union did not, have a great trust in the system and in the political state. So. Addressing to what you say, it's a bit different here.
Well, I'm not saying that those mediations are always trusted, but the counter-narratives are also part of the same dynamic, right? If you say we cannot trust the government, it's actually different. I would say that in general, the fact that mediation is so ephemeral, that you can see it, that you can smell it, is something that almost invites speculation, especially in an environment where there is a history of a legitimized and understandable history of distrust towards the authorities. So that's also part of it. But there is no sense of radiation without forms of mediation, right? Without scientific mediation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's maybe stick a bit more to this question of a political dimension, because this is something that really is pointed out in all your comments very clearly. But I would like to look at it in a bit different manner. So I would like now maybe ask you more about the way it is used and abused and politicized in somehow. So not the politics around the catastrophe during or before, but how these catastrophes are then brought into somehow a play around. So by using and abusing this to the different different milieus of people, to the different environments of people, and how the catastrophe may differ people in need. I mean, how other layers, like for example class, race, maybe not so much here in those cases, economic statuses, social statuses, may somehow differently influence the way the catastrophe is politicized. Camila?
That was my that was the beginning of my work with the flood, because I observed that when I was writing about Wrocław, other things, I observed that there is very huge narration about how this flood changed the attitude, Wrocław residents' attitude towards the city, that it changed this way that people started to see the pre-war German heritage, that it started to be important for them because they fight for it during the flood. You know, feeling the sandbags, they started to love and see, I think, first of all, the German heritage. So I saw it, I read about it in books written by Polish academics, and I observed the situation, this vernacular, we can say, discourses, and I observed there is nothing like that there is no way that people see the situation differently, and they use or they think about the flood as a, you know, the point of change. There's nothing, nothing happened this way, and I asked people about that, and they were all of them were surprised because they didn't read this academic stuff, so they know the story from me, and they were really surprised because for them the flood is only the dirt, the smell, and the inconvenience of everyday life, that they couldn't, you know, there were no fresh water, there were no gas, no electricity, no transport, no telephones, so the life was really poor, and that was what they remember, and not, you know, that they changed the way of thinking of German heritage, dissonant heritage. So now there's still dissonant heritage. So I think that it's very strong. The narration academic stuff is really, very strong, and it's spreading very nicely. So academics from other cities, not only Polish, take it and see you and write. You can see that Wrocław battled for the city, and now people love the city. It's the best example in Poland how the flood changed the thinking of the past of the city. It's not true, it not happened, but it's the story is really in good condition, we can say, and it's spreading all the time.
But I had that I had this very, I would say, strict and very convincing, I would say, image of the flood that was brought up with the film I was addressing to, because there was a lot of, I would say, comments, the reviews of the movie, the series, actually, this is a mini-series. The comments of the movie, the articles in the press, in media, and people writing on the very popular level, not at an academic discourse. They were writing that this movie finally shows how the flood became a founding myth of contemporary Wrocław people. So I'd say that this discourse not only was rooted somehow in the academic sphere, but also in more popular discourses, at least those that were brought up by journalists or reviewers or people who were writing about the movie, and of course at the same time about the flood. And that they were stressing that this is a kind of the kind of bringing back the visibility and the foundation myth. So what do you think about this narrative?
It is a foundation myth, but it doesn't work. So we have better myths, we have better foundation stories. And that is the story of the city with broken cultural duration, that we still need stories because we have no bond with the fabrics, city fabrics. So the flood was I think, last very popular in this public discourse, elite discourse, foundation story of the city. So that is example or proof maybe that previous stories didn't work. The Piast story about this, this medieval roots of the Polishness of these terrains, but very strong is pioneer story of the first generation, first settlers who came there and they fight for this anonymous ruins because we couldn't say that they are German ruins. So, and they bring and they create new reality. So this story is very popular, but this story about flood doesn't exist in the vernacular everyday discourse of people in Wrocław.
But do you think that it might start functioning like that because of the public discourse that goes around it?
No, I think not.
You think?
I think that in Wrocław people are focused more about this. I don't have water. I can't go. I couldn't go to work. So that was the problems. And that was what they remember. But I thought because when I think we were talking about this film, and Evelina asked me why I don't want to see it, and I said because of my fear. Because I feel the fear inside. I remember the fear that I had. And I'm very curious if, because I read it somewhere, that we have this discourse memory and we have this embodied memory, so or remembrance. And I'm very curious if really people don't remember, because I'm sure that they were in fear. They were frightened what is happening, and they don't want to talk about it now.
But more like during and after, and not pre or expecting, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. But what about the uses and abuses of politics around the topic of Vaillant? Marco, could you please tell a bit more about your case in that terms?
Sure. Because I mean the issue of the politicization of the Vaillant Dam disaster is really extremely relevant in the story and in my research. It was immediately an issue even precisely for the people of the Vaillant Valley and in general for the public opinion. First of all, there was a huge clash, a relevant clash between what I would call a naturalization narrative of this event and the political narrative about this event. So basically, all the mainstream media, newspapers, the day after the disaster, so we are talking about October 10th, 1963, all Italian newspapers were describing this disaster more or less with the same words. They were saying, it's a terrible natural disaster. Nature can be, can be terrible and horrible against humans, and we need to cry for all the people who are dead now. The only, and you need to think that this is, Cold War kind of, and this, of course, much better than me. This is the Cold War time. So this was the mainstream discourse about this event. The only one who were, making a different narrative of this event were actually the Italian communists. And they could do that because they were engaged with the disaster, with the Vaillant case since the very beginning. So I told you that the dam disaster happened in 1963. Well, in 1959, so 4 years before the disaster, the newspaper of the Italian Communist Party published an article by a woman journalist, Tina Merlin, and she was precisely, how can I say, it was very prophetic. She was imagining the disaster. She was very optimistic. She was thinking about more or less 500 people killed. So a much, smaller disaster that what happened. So the Communist Party had an engagement with all this story since the very beginning. And they were basically saying this is not the time only to mourning the death, to cry for the victims, but it's also a time to ask for justice. So the politicization was immediately the day after the disaster. And it was also the trial was a political trial, because the entire discussion in the trial was, on one hand, the people, defending the corporation and the state authorities, agencies, saying this was a disaster that no one could foresee. It was impossible to see it. Especially they were saying, sure, we knew that a landslide was there, but no one could imagine that it would be so big and especially so fast, so quick. So the issue about the politicization was very strong. The Italian communists were accused to be, they said, like in English would be, I am not sure how would we say in English. In Italian was jackal, which means more like vultures, I think, in English. There is an animal metaphor that is maybe doesn't work in English. So they were accused to politicize the disaster for their own, electoral purposes and so on and so forth. My point, my argument in the book is that the whole story was political already since the very beginning. I mean, what was not political in a valley transformed into an hydroelectric engine. I mean, everything was political already. The politicization was happening before, during and after the disaster. The Italian communists, they had their own agenda. And of course, they were putting, they were trying to expose the responsibilities of the corporation and of the people in power at that time, right? But on the other hand, the naturalization narrative was political too, because they were trying to say that there was nothing wrong about the system, about the authorities, about everything happening. It was just a terrible accident. So I am always a little bit perplexed when people say that things become political when the marginals, the subalterns, try to have a voice. When it's only the power people talking, it's perfect. It's not political. I remember, actually, if I can just make a very quick example, I remember my supervisor, I did a PhD in economic history with me, and at a certain point I was trying to defend, the common property in the 19th century Italian forest. And this person told me, well, Marco, but you are ideological, of course, because you are trying to defend the commons, while the only thing was actually to impose the privatization as they did. And I told him why I am ideological or political and you are not. Let's at least agree that we are all political and ideological. Just you want, privatizing everything. I am a little bit more skeptical. But yes, so the political issue was extremely present. It's not my, how can I say, my interpretation. It was there immediately after the disaster.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for bringing up this question of different politicizations and groups of people who politicize somehow, because this was exactly what I was going to ask you about when you started to speak about it. So great, thank you for this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have like the politics in a very wide range of perspectives, and politicization is much broader than only the state questions, for example, yeah, state issues. So thank you very much. And I was wondering what the conspiracy theories mean for the politicization of the Chernobyl question, because I think this is a case, yeah, here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So first of all, it's important, maybe as sort of a background, to realize, and this was already mentioned by Alexandra in her presentation on Chernobyl, that a very dominant frame during the cleanup operation that lives on up till today, especially in Russia, to some extent also in Belarus, is a framing of the cleanup operation in the aftermath of the catastrophe as a battle, as a World War II heroic, self-sacrificing battle against another enemy, this time radiation, right, or the effects of radiation, which of course is in a way a very unapt metaphor for thinking about this. There's no enemy with intention in the same way that there was when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union. It's a very different situation, but it allows also to deflect responsibility, to create a sense of unity against an enemy. It also invests this whole catastrophe, which is basically the result of mismanagement. It invests it with an aura of heroism, right, in itself. Then there are counter-narratives very early on, for instance in Belarus, also in Ukraine, and some of them are conspiratorial, saying, and of course the fact that this event, that this catastrophe has been covered up initially, doesn't help in that respect. It creates speculation, right? It prompts conspiracy thinking. And some of the conspiracy theories, Ukrainian conspiracy theories, for instance, also conspiracy theories in the nationalist opposition forces movements in Belarus, came up with the idea that Chernobyl was a planned event. I mean, conspiracy theories are always about intentions, and that is at the heart of their politicization, I'd say, to make things that seem natural or accidental, turn them into intentional, deliberate, man-made, man-designed events. So one of them is the idea that this was a planned event in order to commit some sort of genocide on the smaller nations of the Soviet Union, for instance. And you would say that then conspiracy thinking is an oppositional thing? Not entirely. Also, from quite early on, there were rumors about the CIA being involved, for instance. Also, to some extent, these have been fanned by the KGB, have been fanned also up till today, actually. If you read the Russian news, for instance, sometimes, especially on the 26th of April, stories about Chernobyl, of course, pop up in the media. Recently, the past couple of years, you see that regularly people from the KGB who were supposedly involved directly after the event in order to investigate what was going on are interviewed. And they suggest, or they are made to suggest, or the framing of the interview suggests that there were people around Chernobyl during that time that might have been foreign Western infiltrators. So the whole idea of Chernobyl not necessarily being an accident is something that has been cautiously but perpetually been cultivated over the past years. And as a final thing, this actually didn't fly. Russian television a couple of years back, I think it was NTV, they planned a series on Chernobyl. And it was, and this may surprise you, but the genre of that series was a detective spy series about Chernobyl. So the question was, is the Russian counterintelligence, are they in time to stop the CIA infiltrators who are going to blow up Chernobyl? In the end, there was already so much criticism, and that is interesting. It was also the time that the HBO series came out. I don't think this was an answer to that. It was a sort of a parallel track. But the announcement of this series already prompted so much criticism that I think people understood, especially with the very well done HBO series, they could not release something conspiratorial like this. It would just be too much, too bad, actually, as a narrative, too unbelievable to throw that out.
This is really interesting and somehow links to the other question I wanted to ask you about the identity building process that goes around the catastrophes we are talking about. And in that case, the question would be to whom it has happened. Is this somehow brought in a conspiracy theories? So who was there and who was not present, and who was sent there to manage the catastrophe and who was not? And I think that addressing also other panelists, so Camila and Marco, and also in your cases, though it's more like a natural disaster than the catastrophe of Chernobyl, it's still also a cultural disaster, yeah? Because you, Marco, you were speaking about the negligence, about the sense of fear, the anxiousness, somehow awareness of that it might happen, yeah, because of the natural features of the mountain and of the terrain. And also in the Wrocław case, we could see it coming. I mean, because of the cultural ways of I don't know, inhabiting the terrains around. That should not be actually built with or covered with settlements, with districts of buildings. So even though your catastrophes are more natural than cultural, I really don't like this division. Of course, I just use it operatively, I'd say. But still. Even here, you can see that this question somehow emerges, yes, about why and to whom it happened. So maybe, Boris, could you please ask this question about the guilt or sense of guilt of people who and the sentiment that someone could actually be there because of something, because of a cause. Yeah. Which is conspiratory.
Well, that's a very interesting question. First of all, it is important to take into account, as was mentioned in some of the other presentations, that liquidators were recruited from all over the Soviet Union, right? Hundreds of thousands, ultimately. So that makes it an event that is not limited to one community or one ethnic group. It is very much sort of a Soviet legacy on the one hand. On the other hand, we are, of course, dealing with an event that is more local, but also transnational and affects especially Ukraine and Belarus. What I find interesting to see in these recent narratives about Chernobyl, also if you look at television series, for instance, that push this conspiracy theory of Chernobyl or just cement the imagination of conspiracy being as a security and intelligence operation by the West, what it does is that it links one catastrophe to the other in a very one-dimensional way. The other catastrophe, of course, being from this Russian perspective, the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? Mm-hmm. So that is part of the conspiracy theory that Chernobyl was a way to basically trigger a deliberate operation to trigger the collapse of the Soviet Union, and was successful. What is very problematic in these Russian narratives is, of course, that it totally appropriates victimhood, totally appropriates the narrative about Chernobyl in a way that does not account for the actual lived experience of people who are still dealing with the perpetuating effects of Chernobyl. So I think my point is that a catastrophe like this can be turned into a foundational identity narrative for different groups, and that is also what is happening, and different stories are told about it that in each of them sort of cement a notion of belonging and a notion of collective identity, but they cannot be, they're incompatible, they're clashing, they're different stories to be told about Chernobyl.
But somehow they are a part of the identity building process.
Absolutely, yeah. I think maybe in all of our cases, I'm curious how that is for Camilla and for Marco. I think we are probably dealing with the social dynamics of trauma, which is not the same as psychological trauma, right? But this mediated social notion that there is an event that, on the one hand, damages our community and our identity, on the other hand, is a reference point which allows for identification, which acts as almost a social glue that holds together communities. But I don't know how it is for
this is really I think very interesting and important issue, and just wrote it down for myself. The next questions I wanted to address to Marco also was this dimension of identity building, the living experience of going through the catastrophe. I mean, I would like to move more from the politics of the discussions around to the experience of people who went through this. And what I wrote down was the question about the trauma on the social level of being the part of this experience of the catastrophe, of experiencing the catastrophes you were all talking about. And I was wondering if in your case, Marco, this social trauma exists. So this would be like the first remark, but the question, and the second, do you see some important features of social experience of going through this event?
Yes. In a sense, it's a very difficult question, because for me, what is difficult about this question is to think about one subject or one actor, right? So what I'm trying to say is that, for instance, after this disaster, after the Vaillon Dam disaster, there was a mobilization. So the country, the nation started, the usual things. So collecting money from, people, trying to help. There were a lot of people going there. In my own book, I have the interviews of some Boy Scouts. They were only 16. They decided to go there and help. So there is, this idea that is often happening, something that is often happening in case of, huge disasters, of the nation try to get together to help, this sense of solidarity and so on and so forth. On the other hand, instead, there is the actual policies that are destroying, from my point of view, any possibility for the local people to exist and survive as a community. So, for instance, the idea was to not build the small villages or towns where they were, but in another place, with this displacement of people that were also divided among different, villages, towns around the area. After a while, there was also actually some kind of blaming of people, since a lot of money were collected and so on and so forth. There was also this idea that those people were actually taking advantage of the situation. Many of them also, this is, from the interviews, oral histories, and so on and so forth, they lost everything. You need also to think that we are talking about, communities that were almost destroyed. 2,000 people up in the Alps means, more or less a genocide, isn't it? So no one was there. If you look at the images, for instance, at a certain point, even somebody from the town arriving in the town in the night of the disaster, he couldn't understand that he was in the town. He couldn't find the town anymore. I am talking about Longarone. No? In the end, he realized that he was in the town because the bell tower was still there. So in the end, he realized I am in Longarone. So the survival of the community was very difficult. And this is a bit connected with the issue of memory. So I don't know how much we want to go to the memory here, but I believe that this clash of, on one hand, this idea of a nationalization of memory. I have called in my book I would say like a regime of memory. Now, the way in which memories are organized, and organizing memory means, first of all, organizing oblivion, now what we are supposed to forget, isn't it? And also the way in which we remember. But maybe I can say something also later on. But those people were actually also expropriated by the very ways in which they could remember the event. So there is a very famous story about the two cemeteries of the Vaillon Dam disaster. There was one cemetery built by the survivors, and then in 2002, if I'm not wrong, with the money coming from the compensation from the trial, the local institution decided to do a memorial for the victims. And basically the old cemetery was destroyed. And they decided to do like a war memorial style, you know, green grass, the stones and so. Well, for me, this is one of the way in which you can make, you know, identity destroying the identity, because you are actually
Yes.
nationalizing memories.
Yes,
Too much
absolutely.
talking on my side, sorry.
No, no, no,
I
no, no,
stop.
no, no, no. It's very interesting, and I think much related to other examples also. So thank you for this these remarks, wonderful remarks, very important. I'm just taking notes right now. So really, thank you very much. But Boris, you wanted to add something, or no? Okay, Kamila, what about the identity building processes around? The experience of going through the flood. You were talking a bit about it already.
Yeah.
That there's not so many, but
you asked about identity and about trauma, and I must say that my example, my flood example, is different than yours, Marcos and Boris, because there were no victims. There were no people died because of the flood. So there is different, we can say it's lighter in some way. But there were, and yes, there were quite strict processes of, so from the beginning maybe. So the city was not prepared for the flood. Nobody believed that it could happen. People really were laughing that the water is coming and there's a danger, the life is there, the city is threatened by the order. So, but what it started to happen, the local authorities asked people for help to fight for the city, and few thousand of residents started to help. So they were filling the sandbanks, and they were trying not to I don't remember the word, sorry. Nie pamiętam. Sorry. They started to fight that that the flood wouldn't spread for all the city, because I didn't say that 30% of the city was under the water. So they were fighting for their main monuments. So that was the beginning of the foundation story, because they were fighting for the center of the city, the oldest building in the city. So that is the beginning, that they were fighting for the heart of the city, because they started to have heart for the city. And that was surprising, because in 90s we are very close to Soviet period, and there were no this distance between this family level and macro level, and there was nothing between these two levels. So people got out from homes, and for many hours every day were fighting with the flood, and they had it in their memories, because they remember very clearly that they were together, that they felt the solidarity, and that was wonderful, that they were together and were fighting, and all finished with the end of the flood. But it's more, but in the stories I gathered, it's more about Polish auto-stereotype, that we Poles work this way, that we are, it's a romanticized story, that we, like to work under pressure. We like to work together when something is happening that is danger. So it's in my interviews, it was in conversations, it was more about Poles than about, Wrocław residents, that we Poles work this way and behave this way. So that was the idea. But the plot of pioneer story was there. So we, as the people, the first people after the war, are fighting. So that was in it also.
But can't it become also a part of a Wrocław story? I mean, the Polish Wrocław story. Do we have to divide those two dimensions, two levels, the Wrocław and local level and the Polishness there?
But I think that the factor of Polishness is very important, that we live more on the level of Polishness than on regional identity. Okay. So I think that it's very important that we think about ourselves more about the Poles than about Wrocław residents still.
Yes, and of course in your case there was no question of displacement, no problems of displacement, almost, yes. And the displacement was something that you mentioned, Marco, and I was wondering if this displacement experience, the displacement memory is somehow important also in the case of Chernobyl, and how does that influence the experience of the catastrophe?
Yeah, that's a.
I think.
Is it? Oh, yeah, this works. Yeah, that's very, very important. Especially, I would say, maybe most of all in the Belarusian parts of what used to be sort of, there are different rings of the exclusion zone around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, of course. But what you see is that over the past decades, parts of those areas in Belarus have been resettled, where people were originally taken away from, evacuated. And this whole resettlement campaign is also framed within almost, or it is clearly affected by this heroic World War II story of we are sort of taking back our land, we are resettling it, which has to do also with the politics of visibility, which I mentioned earlier, right? So it is a political decision what you consider to be a safe area. In many cases, it's very hard to say that an entire area is safe. There are always pockets, for instance, where radiation is much more severe, and that can pose a danger. So it is also a political decision to comply and to disseminate that heroic story of we are resettling like pioneers. We are also resettling the land, right? So yeah, I see quite some intersections there, resonances. Yeah.
Thank you. There's so many questions I would like to raise still about how memory sets itself on the kind of experience of the breaking ground experience as going through the catastrophes or natural disasters, or how environmental memory works here and the environmental issues are addressed here. But I have to leave you only with this question marks. Maybe this will come out somehow in our discussion. And right now, as we are slowly running out of time, I would like to ask the audience for the questions. So the floor is yours right now. Please give some remarks. Pose the questions. Małgorzata?
Thank you. I'm not sure if I will manage to formulate a question, but I will start with digesting what you said. I am struck a bit by Camila's reflection, your own personal participation in this natural disaster that was the flood, and how it influences then a resistance to form a cultural, a collective memory of an event. I am trying to find some connections to the COVID pandemics, and many of us probably had personal experiences with it. And I remember myself reading in a newspaper some commentary that there are no monuments commemorating victims of COVID, and I felt like it was abuse of my own experience of that. So when trying to compare experiences of I don't know, pandemics, everything what is the topic of this conference, with experiences of war, revolutions, and all these traditional memory topics. I'm wondering what is the difference and what are the mechanisms of constructing collective recollections of these events. Do you have some observations to that?
I think that people don't want to remember. I think that is a similar situation like with COVID. People don't want to remember the flood. And every year I check the media, because every year in July, I read it somewhere and I feel it really. I didn't find it in any interview, on any speech which I gathered, that I read it somewhere, that I am someone who experienced this flood wrote that I'm fear of July, every July, that I'm afraid of that it would happen again. And I asked people about that, and they say, no, not at all. I'm not afraid. But I'm not sure if they are, since it's a frank answer, because I am really afraid of it. That's why I don't want to see the film, because I feel that it can back this fear. And I think that people are not, we have this public discourse, because this political discourse that we fight and we are the winners and it's great now because we love the city more and more deeply, and it's not true, and people try to believe it, because in Wrocław people get used to that. We still always have some narrations that we share, and I think that they try to believe that that is our story about the flood. We have one monument of the flood. It's a woman in the water, till her waist, and she's bringing books. It's near the library, but it's in such a place that nobody can see it really, and I don't understand the monument. So I think that we want to forget it, as we want to forget the COVID era. And we don't want to. And one thing what people like to remember, that they were together, like in 80s in Poland, when this, I don't know what is in English, stan wojenny.
Martial law time.
Thank you. So they try to prepare this kind of memoirs, that we were together, we drank vodka, and have barbecues, and it was great. But I think that it's a kind of a story that we like to share more than the real experience they had.
Okay,
Can I jump?
Yes, please, Marco,
moment?
do so.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry,
do so.
I promise I will be short. No, the only thing I want to say is that maybe we could try to, how can I say, to think a little bit more about this idea of people. Because, we are always talking about, people, do we remember COVID-19? Do we have a monument and so on? And we are assuming that there is people that, but it's not like that. I mean, there are people who really want to remember because they feel there is something at stake, people that would really want to forget. And, there is also an issue about who's going to set up this regime of memory. So, for instance, a monument built with the money of the corporation who was, guilty from a legal point of view, they were found guilty of the disaster. Well, maybe it's something that some people, they don't want it. So my main point, and I will shut up, is that I believe that we need to make peace with the fact that we have divided memories, and we need to think about what to do with these divided memories. I am afraid, I should say I'm anxious, maybe it's better. I am anxious when we think that we can have a uniform, coherent and cohesive regime of memories, because
Absolutely.
generally speaking, it's the memory imposed by mainstream understanding of history, and so we are living we are leaving out a lot. Sorry, stop.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for this important remark. I don't know, Boris, would you like to add something to this question or not really? Okay. Okay. Łukasz, please.
Hi, I've got one quite precise question to Marco. Is there any commemoration for the, let's say, not victims, but the heroes of this event? I mean, Italo Calvino's brother, or those two legal counsels that represented the townspeople. Are they commemorated in any way? Thanks.
Thank you. As I said, in general, for more or less 30 years, the Vaillant Dam disaster was erased. There was no commemoration, nothing going on. Everything happened with this monologue, with this theatrical piece of this actor and author of theater, Marco Polini. So this is maybe the first thing. For instance, the journalist, Tina Merlin, this journalist who were writing about the disaster, much in advance. So she was really like, a heroine of this story. I realized that there is no monument for her, but there are a couple of things, how can I say, dedicated to her, like how do you say, school room, maybe a room in a school or something like that. So nothing really important. Nowadays, there is a day, so the 9th of October, there is a commemoration. And generally, if I'm not mistaken, there are two commemorations. So there is the official one, and then there is a grassroots one, just to reiterate my point about the divided memory. But you know what? I think that, for instance, Sandro Canestrini was the plaintiff lawyer. He did a fantastic job in defending the survivors. He published a book on the Vaillant Dam disaster, to my benefit, I must say, to the benefit of historians. I don't think that there is a lot going on. And I discovered another guy, very, very important, very crucial. He was working in the university, and he stole a report about the dam that was secret, and he gave the report to the public prosecutor to let people know that the corporation knew about the risk before, and nothing really about him. So I would say that not so much about the only one that are celebrated are the military people, because they arrived, and I mean, nothing wrong. They did a lot of job of good work, and it was also I mean, I have read their testimonies. They were completely under post-traumatic trauma, because you need to understand that people were not just body on the ground. I don't want to go into the details, but what happened there was something more than just some people droning. It was very hard to find actually the body.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I think that we have only the time for the maybe last question from the room. Is that a question? No? Okay. If not, as we reach the coffee break, I need to thank you very warmly for your wonderful, brilliant remarks on the catastrophes you are and were working on. So thank you, Camila, once again. Thank you, Boris, for sharing with us your conspiracy theories and other issues. And thank you, Marco, of course, for being with us. Thank you. This was a pleasure. Thank you very much, and let's have a coffee.